Welcome to the show Goldsquadrongays. It's the podcast where two Star Wars loving gays talk about and review their favorite Star Wars content while also being gay as hell. I'm your host, Bradley Brower.
I'm your other host, Charles Rogers, and thank you for joining us on another edition of The Things Charles and Bradley Fucked Up in Their Episode 0, which is all this coverage is, by the way, of every show. It's just, here's what we fucked up when we were predicting things in Episode 0.
My headcanon is that our Episode Zeros for every show are legends, and none of it is canon unless it happens to work.
We can bring stuff from Legends into canon sometimes,
right.
But not all the time. We just recorded, so as of recording this, it is February the 22nd, and we have recorded our Bad Batch episode like 3 or 4 days ago, and then the Bad Batch premiere came out and immediately proved a bunch of stuff we said wrong.
Which we love. So that it's going to be great for you all to listen to this in a couple months and hear this episode and hear how wrong we are about the Bad Batch season.
Oh, so, boy, were we wrong about some of this. Some of the stuff we said could turn out to be right.
That's true. We don't know yet anything, right? We only know the first 3 episodes
We only know the first three, and if you've watched them, you know that the first 3 episodes are pretty each self-contained. So, without going into any specifics, but we do get some things wrong right off the bat. But you're not here to talk about the Bad Batch today. We are here to finish, at long last, our coverage of Ahsoka, a show that Bradley and I definitely watched.
We had been waiting almost... When did it get announced? When was the first, what year was it announced?
So it got announced in that big, all the way back in 2021. Right. There was this Disney investor call, and they had just launched Disney Plus, and they were trying desperately to, basically sell investors on Disney Plus. And so what they had them do is they had a bunch of the different heads of things come out and just vomit shows out on there. I think they announced, we talked about this before. They announced 10 Star Wars shows and a movie that were all going to come out. And they were just, I remember sitting there because I was in a training at work, but it was a job I hated and didn't care about and found deeply unethical. So I wasn't actually paying that much attention. I was watching the press conference and also talking to one of the trainers in a private DM during the training about the session that we were definitely not supposed to be watching, but we did watch. And they announced all these shows, they announced Rangers of the New Republic, which obviously didn't happen. They announced Ahsoka. They announced Lando, which is becoming a movie. They announced Obi-Wan Kenobi. They announced fucking everything.
Right.
The Acolyte got announced. And all this stuff, and that's where Ahsoka got announced for the first time.
That's so crazy that the Acolyte and Ahsoka got announced in the same announcement, and we got it so much longer, later. It's so weird to think about, but yeah.
Yeah, I don't think they've announced a new TV show. The last new TV show that I think they announced that was live action was Skeleton Crew.
Yeah, I think you're right.
Which was 2022?
At Celebration, right?
At Celebration, yeah. I was there.
You were there. You were the history in the making.
I was there. I was in the room. No, because the last Celebration 2023, they just announced movies essentially.
And really, they were just concepts of movies. They didn't even have titles or anything. So it wasn't. Those are technically not set in stone until we see a fucking title on the slate. It's not. Or they
Heir to the Empire. We know the title of Heir to the Empire.
But again, until they begin filming, nothing is set in stone. So it's you really can't even take that at face value, because we can call Heir to the Empire a movie all we want, but until Filoni steps on to the soundstage day one, that movie is in the ether. We don't know. Now, thankfully, Ahsoka has clearly set up what could be the Heir to the Empire movie.
We're getting Heir to the Empire. We're getting Rey. We're getting Heir to the Empire. I don't know about Dawn of the Jedi. I don't know if I want Dawn of the Jedi. That's a conversation that we can have an entirely different time.
I was going to say, once that teaser trailer is dropped at the next Celebration for that movie, or they say, nah, just kidding, we're not doing it anymore, or whatever the case may be, then we can talk about it.
So actually, I read the Dawn of the Jedi novel recently, because I've been on this kick of, even I have not read all of Legends. And so I'm on this kick now of I'm going to go back and read stuff that I missed prior, because I now have disposable income to buy these things. And I've been reading the Dawn of the Jedi. I read the Dawn of the Jedi novel, Into the Void, and now I've been reading the comics. I'm 2/3 of the way done with the comics. Surprisingly good. Like, questionable art choices, but surprisingly good. So now I'm like, maybe I do want a Dawn of the Jedi movie? I don't know. We'll see. But that was when Ahsoka was announced. Ahsoka and the Acolyte. The Acolyte, technically maybe the last show that was announced in this batch that we're going to see. Because Lando's a movie, and no one knows if a droid story even exists anymore.
I always forget about that until you say it.
Everyone forgets about it. I have not forgotten.
Because there was not even a concept of what it even was. Like, they didn't even explain. They just said, here's the title. Like, they didn't say
here's the title. It's about the droids.
Yeah.
R2, C3PO, and another little droid companion, and that's it. That's all they basically said.
Yeah.
But no, and I'm kind of glad. One, I think they need to slow down with the live action TV.
100%.
Two, I like that we're getting more movies in the mix. Three, I would prefer that they did not formally announce projects several years prior to them coming out.
Right. I don't like this trend that Disney's doing where they wait for an investor call and then just vomit a bunch of stuff, and then they're like, "Oh, we're making Frozen 5." It's like, you haven't even made Frozen
because that's
4
who
yet.
their clients, that's who their real clients are, that's who their real customers are. It's not us, it's the investors.
Yeah.
And so, like, I remember Percy Jackson season 2, that was the big one, like, that everyone was surprised when they did not renew Percy Jackson and the Olympians for season 2 fucking immediately after the season premiered. Like, I think a lot of people were surprised, and especially after week 3 or 4, when it was clear that the show did in fact have staying power.
Right.
The fact that they waited multiple weeks after the final episode to renew it for season 2 on an investor call and tell people on an investor call, what? I hate that that's how they did that. Although I am glad that we are getting season 2, which means hopefully we'll get season 3, and then they'll introduce my favorite character.
I just hope that, like, they need to stop. I don't like the waiting to do it. I think they should do it at the end or something. Be like, Percy Jackson will return in season 2. Like, something
That's
along those lines.
That's what they fucking did for Loki.
Right. So I don't understand why they can't do that. And we didn't even get that show for like a year and a half later. So it's like,
yeah, Marvel did this too, to where they also vomited a bunch of shows.
Yeah.
The difference is that Marvel ended up making a bunch of those shows.
I think for the most part, I don't know the whole list, but yeah, I think, or it was they either made the thing they said they were going to make, or it was reworked into something else. But it was still made. It was just reworked.
Yeah, and I think that most of the Lucasfilm projects got made or reworked. I know Rangers got rolled into we now kind of know what Rangers was going to be about, but I really don't want to address that because that involves talking about a thing that I'm like, we're not going to talk about because I don't want to give it any attention. But we know Rangers, some of the concepts they had for that were rolled into The Mandalorian. So that the lore that they were kind of planning around the Rangers and stuff has gotten rolled in. I think most of the shows that they announced got made or like for sure coming out, like The Acolyte. The only one I think that hasn't, Droid Story and Lando hasn't come out yet. Who knows when that movie's going to happen? That's not even on their slate coming up. So, but Ahsoka got made, and we have now spent 10 minutes talking about that fucking investor call from 2021. When they dumped everything. But one of the things they dumped was Ahsoka, and now we have finished covering the first season of it. Bradley, how do you feel? How do you feel having made it through Ahsoka? Was it as brutal as we expected it was going to be after her episode of Mando season 2?
I think it was surprisingly good. I just don't think it was as like so FU, like epic brain melting that we thought it was going to end up being. And that's on us. I don't think we should have gone out of our way to be like, okay, we're going to be so fucking unbearable during this show. It's fucking terrible. Like, we are awful people. We love this stuff too much. Because I don't think it was that crazy. I think it was good. I think it was actually, for Dave Filoni's first outing kind of on his own into live action, really, this was a great, like, just for anybody making TV, this is fantastic. But for him specifically, going from animation, jumping into live action, and then kind of dipping his toe in with Mandalorian stuff, and then being like, okay, here's your own fucking show with a character you know is your baby, essentially. That is like, it was such a good outing for him, I think, for his premiere show and live action show. And I'm proud of him for doing that. I also think like he needs to work on some things, but that's because I think Dave has this thing where he is the master of his like world, and he
Right.
wants to do everything because he wants it to be perfect. And the problem is when you do everything yourself, it's not necessarily like gonna end up great. You gotta give trust to some people. You gotta hand over
Right.
the reins
And
a little bit.
I've talked before about how on the one hand it is sort of nice that, Dave Filoni set out to make the show that Dave Filoni wanted to make, and for better
Right.
or worse, what we have on the screen is essentially what we wanted or what he wanted. But can I confess something on the air
This is
now
the
that we have
episode.
finished?
This is
Now
the
that we have
episode to do
finished?
it. So go for it.
When this show was first airing, I did not like it.
Oh, okay.
I dropped around episode 2 or 3. I was like, this is rubbing me wrong. I'm not feeling this.
Yeah.
And I kept my peace and I was silent because we weren't covering it, and I don't want to like pile on a bunch of things because I know some very close friends of mine absolutely were loving the show, and I'm like, I'm not going to go to them and be like, yeah, I'm not liking this. I'm really not enjoying it. And I was diplomatic about it whenever I would talk to people at parties, and I would be like, it's this and that, and try to focus on the parts that I like. Having covered it, and I think not only digging into the bones of kind of what's going on with the characters and what the journey actually is, but also being able to articulate the parts of it that I didn't like the major structural issues, actually helped me enjoy the show a lot more. Because when I went back and I was watching it again for episodes, I was like, oh, that's a neat detail. Oh, I understand what that character beat now was supposed to be. And because I know it's coming, it's kind of like how I think I liked Rise of Skywalker to the degree that I did, in part because I knew some of the things that were going to happen in the movie before I walked into the theater. And I had already, this is why I think the first experience maybe isn't necessarily the best one. Because when you go back and watch something after the fact, and you can take a piece of media and you can look at it broadly, like what was it trying to do? What did it do the entire time? Especially Ahsoka, which was one story told over 3.5 hours. My opinion of it drastically improved. Now, am I going to say that the show doesn't have major structural issues and that the character work isn't a little too subtle, or that some characters do not get anywhere close to the depth that they needed to get for the setup, or that there were some weird choices made? No, I've said all that. I just spent 8 episodes. I spent something like 15 hours over the course of 8 episodes talking about all of that. But I agree with you in that the show was good. It wasn't the most amazing thing that I've ever seen with my eyeballs and melted them out of my skull, but the show's good. And it very is quintessentially Dave Filoni. And I think he gets the characters, and I think he gets both the world and the tone. It's such a Star Wars show. That's the thing that I found I was liking more about it. When I was like, we're just going to take a deep breath and watch this thing that's in front of me that I already know what happens. And I was like, oh, this is hella fun. Like all those action sequences we skipped over because there weren't any Easter eggs or anything thematic or character.
Right.
Some of those were so fucking cool, even on the rewatch. Like the fight in space when she's like fighting the ships in the spacesuit is fucking cool.
Iconic.
I love that. So I've even been on my own journey with this show over the course of us covering it. And that's where I think that doing this show, doing Gold Squadron Gays, and challenging myself to dig into this little corner of media as hard as I do has actually improved my enjoyment of this franchise. Because now I've trained myself to really go into the details and go, what is this story trying to say? What is going on with the characters? And how am I enjoying it? What about it are things that I can specifically point to and go, I enjoyed that. That was my deep confession on the podcast, is I didn't like the show when it was aired.
No, well, and I think that kind of bleeds also into, I think that this show probably would have been better if it was 100% animated. It's not that I don't think that Dave can make a live action show. I just think that this particular story needed 2 or 3 more episodes. And unfortunately, budgetary wise, even though Disney has fuck you money, I don't think that they were willing to give Dave those extra, $1 million just to make a couple more episodes just to flesh out the story even more because,
And the 8 episode thing is like across streamers and bullshit. Like
right.
it's not specifically just a Disney problem.
Yeah.
It's so stupid. Because like in 8 episodes, you can do a lot with 8 episodes. Like there's some stories you can tell in 8 episodes or less. Obi-Wan Kenobi needed to be 6 episodes.
Correct.
It was the right length. It was a little bit longer than a movie. It was about an hour and a half longer, 2 hours longer than a movie would be. Sure. And that was the right length to tell the story that they wanted to tell. Ahsoka really did need that extra space. Yeah. And that's part of the problem with some of these shows is they do wind up needing that extra space. And it's to the medium of whatever the storytellers are trying to do. Like Young Royals is about to come back for its 3rd season, and I won't shut up about it. That show only has 6 episodes per season, and they're like 20 minutes long. But I still came out of every season of that show feeling satisfied with the story they told, because they work economically with the time, and they've developed the show and the characters in such a way. I'm not going to name any names because I haven't watched the show, but I'm a little skeptical of certain shows that have just come out trying to take something that was previously many episodes and get it down into 8 episodes as to whether or not they can successfully accomplish the same story. I don't know. I haven't seen it yet. I don't know if I will see it, but that would be one of the things that I'm a little bit skeptical of is when you're trying to take a story that really needed a lot of time to develop and cram it down. And I do feel like Ahsoka to that extent needed at least 2 more episodes, or if this would have been an animated show, then you would have had maybe a 20 episode season or a 22 episode season to tell your story.
I mean, even a truncated, 16 episode season or something like that still, I think would have been effective. I think the problem was that you had an A story, a B story, a C story, and a D story, and an E story. Like, it was like there were so many extra storylines going on because you had, like, obviously Ahsoka and Sabine's kind of main story, but then there was also, the Thrawn through line with Morgan, and then also Balin and Shin kind of have their own thing going on, but then also Hera is introduced and like, wait, is there also something going on there? And then it's like, but then we have to bring Ezra back in, and there's another aspect to that, like which timeline or which story is he involved in? Is he in the Thrawn one or is he in the Hera one later on? Because then it all kind of blends together, and it's really kind of annoying because I think the problem with this is not technically an ensemble show, but I felt like it had enough characters to be an ensemble show.
Right.
And it was like, we needed to, like, if you were going to do that, like this season should have solely been just Ahsoka and Sabine's story with a Thrawn back line, of being the threat. I don't think that it was that. I think the problem is really, actually, I hate to say this, but the problem was Balin and Shin. And it's not that I don't like those characters. I actually love those characters, and I think that needs to be like a season 2 thing, but they did not need to be in this story. And I feel like they crowded the characters a little too much.
It got to sort of a point in the middle for me where they basically were doing stories in about 20-minute chunks that were really good 20-minute chunks in isolation. So we would have, 20 minutes with Ahsoka, and it was particularly episodes 5 and 6, where we had about 20 minutes with Ahsoka and Anakin, and that was a great story on its own. And then we had about another 20 minutes of Hera and Ahsoka figuring out how to use Star Whales and trying to talk off the New Republic, and that was really good on its own. And then we jumped over to have a completely separate 20 minutes about a bunch of completely separate characters, Thrawn, Morgan, Balin Shin, all of those characters in the evil Tower of Fingering, and then that was over in about 20 minutes. And then we jumped to a completely different story in the same episode. Now it's about Sabine trying to find Ezra and her journey with the relationship with the Howler and how that parallels her relationship with Ahsoka. And I feel like particularly in the middle section, these stories were not necessarily interwoven together in the way that maybe they should have been, or they weren't spread out maybe in the way that they should have been. And I mean, I don't want to spend the entire recap episode basically reiterating the structural problems with this show, but really, like, that is the thing I think that prevents this show from being better than good.
Right.
That I think prevents it from being a truly great piece of TV is those issues. Because I also feel like that if you could resolve those issues, then you would have much more time to do things like bring the characters more to the forefront not in the way that I didn't feel like they were when I first watched the show. And then we went and dug in and I was like, oh no, actually, Ahsoka and Sabine have really compelling character arcs. They have a really compelling journey over the course of the season. It's just kind of hard to see if you don't go looking for it. And I felt like that could have resolved some of those issues with how those stories were put in order and set up. And maybe, I haven't done my usual thing because I have no time. I haven't done my usual thing where I binge watched the whole show before I did the recap. And maybe like with Book of Boba Fett, did I ever tell you about my experience in binge watching Book of Boba Fett with my partner?
Yeah.
Where it got more enjoyable, but also the structural issues with that show became more glaringly obvious. I wonder if Ahsoka probably would be the same way.
I think so. I mean, even when I was rewatching it, I was like, thank God I don't have to wait a week to watch the next episode. Because I think a lot of the time with this, it was like, I don't get me wrong, I actually prefer a weekly release versus a Netflix style of
so do I.
Binge watching. I hate binge watching. I think it's terrible. I think it's ruining the industry. Because the problem is you're making these 8-episode movies essentially, and you're not making a show that is truncated in these hour-long or 45-minute long chunks, which is an actual self-contained story, and you're doing it for like, oh well, you have to watch the next one because otherwise then the next thing's not going to make sense. And then I don't like that. I don't like when they do that. That's why I like that Ahsoka was doing weekly. And the only problem I thought was like, I think when Ahsoka was doing the weekly, we found a point even when we were covering it that they were just cutting it off at the wrong time, or like the cliffhanger was like the wrong moment to cliffhang. Like it was like, well, we already know what that thing is, or we already know certain things. And it's like, I don't know. I just felt like sometimes, like you said, structurally, I think they should have just shifted some things around. And had they done that, the weekly thing would have been great. I think if you had really set it up to where like, oh, here's the reveal. Oh, here's the reveal at the end of each episode. And it made sense.
The ending of episode 4 is a fucking banger.
Yeah.
The ending of episode 4 is fucking amazing. Like the cliffhanger ending of where Anakin shows up at the end of the episode and it ends on a shot of him and it's just like boom, in credits, and you're like, what the fuck?
Right.
What just happened? Love that. Loved that ending. Or even kind of the ending of episode 1 where Sabine gets stabbed and she collapses on the ground, cut to black. And like, now, she's not dead.
Right.
She's not dead.
I guess the problem with that one was because of the double premiere, we knew like you could instantly find out, oh, she's not dead. Like in like 1 second. You could
instantly find it out.
Yeah. So it was like,
for me, the issue that I find I run into, and I get there's a twofold issue. Right? Issue number 1 is, I've been saying this forever, and I'll keep saying this because I'm correct, is that across all of streaming, not just Star Wars, but all of streaming, all streamed shows, there is a tendency to write shows to be binged and then release them weekly. And these are two very different formats that you have to do. Like, they know that all of the dumb nerds will watch this show weekly, and then everybody else will watch it when it's binged, and that's the intended experience. Like, I love Andor. Andor is one of my favorite shows of last year. Not a show that was designed weekly, and I knew a lot of people who stopped watching it midway through.
Wow. Yeah.
And binged the rest of it because they sussed out Andor was not designed to be released weekly. Andor was designed to be binge watched because of the nature of how the arcs are set up and because of the nature of just how depressing the show is. So that's problem number 1, is they write these shows to be binged and then release them weekly. And then the other issue that we run into is when you release a show weekly, or when you release a show on binge, like you dump the whole season. The problem you run into with that, it used to be that when Netflix was doing this, like before I had even met you, back in the halcyon days of 2013, 2014, when we didn't know each other and both of our lives were so much better. Before that, when Netflix would drop a full season of a show, that was an event. Right. House of Cards drops a season. You're still going to talk about that season for at least a month afterwards. Because 1, it's prestige TV that they poured a massive budget into. And they've really gone out of their way to make sure it looks good. And that the writing is excellent. And that the acting is excellent. And all of that. But also it's kind of an event. So nowadays, because everybody's dumping this stuff on there in whole season chunks, or in like over the course of 3 weeks, you've moved on to something by the next month. Like a thing will come out, everybody will watch it, everybody will talk about it, and then it's over. By the next month, you've moved on to the next thing.
Right. Yeah, because they've already dropped something else.
Right.
Somewhere
They've
else.
dropped something else. Because that's the business model, is would just keep shoveling content at you so you don't switch over to a different app. So you watch all the ads on our app because that's where we're actually getting our ad revenue from.
I do find one thing interesting is that there is a model for that Netflix is doing for one of their reality shows. And what they do is I don't want to call it arcs because it's not that kind of story, but they have the show is segmented into sections essentially. So you have the one section, which is like the dating section, and then you have the second section, which is like vacation time, and then you have the third section, which is like let's live together. And so they release them at different dates throughout the month, and it's really smart because it makes everybody talk about the first section, and they talk about it for a few weeks because they can binge all the episodes, all 6 or 7 episodes, and then they go, okay, now we're talking about this for a few weeks leading up till the end of the month when they're going to release the next 4 episodes about the vacation. And it's very interesting how they do it because they do it in chunks.
You know what show has done a surprisingly excellent job with its release? Young Jedi Adventures. Do you know how Young Jedi... No, I am deadly fucking serious. Do you know how Young Jedi Adventures is released?
5-year-olds don't really care about when the show gets released, so I'm curious about what they're doing. They have a 22 episode season that they've released in 6 episode batches over the course of like 3 months. That's so weird.
3 or 4 months. So like rather than do it like 2 episodes a week or 3 episodes a week, like Amazon Prime tends to do it. We saw it with Vox Machina, Husband Hotel. That's kind of how Prime does it. And rather than do it weekly, what they'll do is they'll drop like 6 new episodes of Young Jedi Adventures. And then a month will go by. And then they'll announce, we're dropping 6 more. And then they'll drop the 6 more. And the people that are going to watch it are going to go watch it. Or people are kind of catching up on it gradually over time.
Right.
And then when something happens, like, mild spoilers for Young Jedi Adventures, but fucking everybody knows this. When they announced Loden and Bell were going to be in it, like a bunch of people went back and watched the previous episodes. Like to binge it, to catch up, like adults watch this show. But also like the show being designed for kids, like they can wait a little bit of time, but also you don't want to drop the whole thing.
Right. Yeah.
So it's really been interesting how they've done the Young Jedi Adventures release model. I think they just released their season series finale, the final episode of the mythology arc of the show, because apparently there is actually a plot to this show. I discovered while watching it, apparently there's an actual plot.
They learned how to count. I'm just kidding.
It's not for kids that are that young.
I'm kidding.
But the way they've done the releases, this has turned less into an episode on the Ahsoka series in particular, and more just talking about the release of the Ahsoka series.
I know. I was going to say, like, we're getting to that point where I want to move on to the next topic.
What the fuck else do we have to say? The show was good. We just did 8 episodes of 2 hours.
You're right. We just talked about the show. It was good. Season 1 was great. So let's talk about season 2.
Yes. And a couple of things with season 2. I want to revisit because there's a lot of discussion. Ray Stevenson did unfortunately pass away after finishing season 1. So now there's some discussion, and the discussion is kind of kicked up again with the season 2 announcement of like, should they recast the character of Baylan? And I've already made my stance pretty clear that I think they should do it. But I'm curious about you, Bradley. What do you think? Because I don't think you ever took a position really on whether or not they should just recast this character.
Yeah, I think because I had a couple different, because we didn't really at the time know, like, I think when we were talking about it, at least, I don't think we knew there was a season 2.
I don't think so. My position has not changed.
But now that we know for sure there's going to be a season 2 and it's live action or whatever, I think that I personally believe that you've said this before about other characters, that we should not marry actors to the roles, and that goes for every character. I don't care if their face is showing or not, or they're underneath a helmet. Like, we need to not have people married to the role and allow other people to take on the role if the story needs it, right? In particularly in Ahsoka's case, it's very clearly set up at the end that Baylan is looking off into the distance and that there's something that he's looking for. His story is not done and it clearly needs to be told. That in that situation, yes, we do need to recast him. him. I think it would be a disservice actually to Rey's memory to not recast him, only because he did such a good job setting up this character and making this character who really doesn't have a ton of screen time, doesn't have a lot to do this season, and give people such a hunger for his story. I think Rey did that so well, and that I think it would be disrespectful to not continue his story. I think it's just that we need that story, and he made it what it is, and I think it's time to like pass the torch and allow someone to really flourish and like take that story and go somewhere with it.
I agree wholeheartedly that if we expect these characters, to be viewed through such a lens of being cultural icons, that some of these characters really have become cultural icons to an insane degree. Characters like Luke Skywalker and Darth Vader and Obi-Wan Kenobi and Leia Organa and all of these other characters, that if we're expecting them to be these sorts of iconic characters, then we also shouldn't be afraid to let different actors take on the mantle, like different actors playing Hamlet, or different actors taking on the same role. I think that that's something that I agree wholeheartedly. I think Rey did such an excellent job with the first season, and it really stands as a testament to his acting prowess that he was able to lend so much depth to Baylan in the first season that, yeah, I really want to see the story that he started continue in some form. And we also know that the casting director of the show did such a fucking phenomenal job, no misses, that whoever they would find to replace him would also be excellent in the role. They're not just going to cast somebody for stunt purposes. They're not going to cast Meryl Streep in Rise of Skywalker to take over for Carrie Fisher. They're not going to do that. They're not going to do something like that.
No, they'll get someone who looks like her. Yeah,
they'll get somebody who, that was an actual thing that I heard, by the way, for Rise of Skywalker, was that they should recast it to Meryl Streep. Yeah, no, I really did hear that at the time.
What? That doesn't even make sense. People are so dumb.
Well, it's also, yeah, and it's the thing, like with Rise of Skywalker, like Leia deserved an ending, and the fact that they used this old footage from The Force Awakens to have Carrie bring her to the end of the story, I think for all the discussion we can have about Rise of Skywalker that one day we will have, I think that aspect of it was something that I ended up really feeling emotional about. With Baylan, it's kind of the same, but not, because we don't have that footage. So I definitely do agree. I do think that they should continue on and give this character the story that Rey set up, and that they should do it by recasting someone in the role and giving them a chance to pick up the torch and carry it forward. I love it when we agree on things.
I know. It makes everything so much easier when we record, because then it's just like we disagree.
Easier. Makes your editing easier too.
Oh, yeah, because I don't have to cut anything out. Yeah, I just literally, I'm just like, okay, great. We all agree. Awesome. Loves it.
You know what else I would like to see in season 2?
Yes.
Some fucking explanation for what the point of Merrick was.
I have a feeling that's never gonna happen. Look, don't get me wrong. You know me, I'm a big Inquisitor person. All Inquisitors are created equal. I love them all so much. I want more Inquisitor all the time, every day, every Star Wars outing we go on, there better be an Inquisitor in it. Even if it doesn't make sense, I need one. And
even if it's in the New Republic era, we gotta have an Inquisitor in there.
In this particular instance, we got an Inquisitor where there didn't need to be one, and so maybe not. However, the Merrick thing, we talked about this when we talked about the Merrick episode, but
extendedly,
right? I think, just to sum up my feelings on Merrick, like, I don't think we'll get him in season 2. However, I would love a novel, maybe just giving his backstory to see where he gets to the point.
Hey, did you know I'm available, Lucasfilm? Hey, Del Rey, did you know you can email me? Did you know I'm available right?
You know what? Instead of waiting for them to email you, I think you should just come up with a draft, let me approve it, and then I'll be like, okay, this looks really good, and then we'll email.
That is not how book solicitation
email an
works.
Outline to Del Rey, and we'll be like,
that is not how it works.
Here you go.
Never do that, writers. No, that's not how IP writing works. Oh my lord. I did always say that if I ever got to write a Star Wars book, I would sneak in some reference to this show into there, but
yeah,
that's a pipe dream. No, I do want to see more of where he comes from. And I feel like there has to be a story there. Right. Like, his inclusion in the story cannot solely be, as I said at the time, just there for the sole purpose of slowing Ahsoka down in episode 4 and in episode 2. There has to be more to that story. Dave Filoni, he does everything with such a sense of intentionality when he's in the driver's seat, that there had to be a reason this character was the way he was. Like,
there's so many things.
I need to know what that was. That's probably my biggest unanswered question that I feel like maybe won't get answered, but definitely needs to, is what the deal with Merrick was. How the fuck did he survive the fall of the Empire? Because by the time of the Battle of Yavin, the Inquisitorius no longer exists, as far as we can tell. The last Inquisitor... Christ, the last Inquisitors died at Malachor, as far as we know.
Oh, in Rebels.
In Rebels.
Yeah.
That's the last we ever hear of the Inquisitors.
Right.
Well, as an organization. We see the Grand Inquisitor's spirit later on after A New Hope. Or actually, no, after Empire Strikes Back. I don't know when that comic happened. We don't need to dwell on
Anyway, I think the way that you fix this for me, because like I think the problem is like with Merrick, that especially that episode, you could have easily just had that be Baylan the whole time, like, because she fights Baylan anyway. So it's like, why would you not just have Shin and Baylan confront them in the woods, them separately fight, and then it just leads into him pushing her off the cliff? Like, you still can reach that point in that story without having it, like, I don't know, it doesn't make sense that Merrick was even there for that scene. Like, it's unless there was a reason. And I think same with even earlier on in the first fucking episode where he appears, they don't even acknowledge his existence.
No, he's just there. He's just there in the first scene.
They never even say, who is this Merrick guy? He just stands there in the background. You could digitally erase him from the episode and it would not make a difference. Like, it just does. I just wish there was more to it. And the other problem I have is too, his death is so, like, there's two things happening. Like, one is we see the green smoke, so we, for some reason, we associate the green with the magic, but maybe it's not related at all because the director said, like, well, he's kind of mechanical like, and then maybe this is something that's inside of him. So like, I'm like, so is he a droid? Is he just like some random droid Inquisitor? Because first of all, that'd be fucking cool. Second of all, maybe that's why he survived this whole time. He's just an Inquisitor.
This is how Proxy is going to become canon. Proxy is like the only thing that I like in Force Unleashed. So if they bring Proxy into canon, I'm also kind of cool with that. You know what I feel like? And I've said this before, I'll say this again because it bears repeating. And it's not saying Dave Filoni is a bad writer. To be clear, I just did 8 episodes on how Dave Filoni is a good writer.
Right.
Dave Filoni desperately needs other people in the room with him when he's writing these things. Or he needs people, and I know he needs other creatives. To be clear, he needs creatives. He does not need more producers telling him what to do.
Right. He still needs to be in charge.
Voices in the room.
Right.
When he does these things, because then they can point these things out. And even if he wants to write the whole thing himself, like he wants to have the final say on everything,
sure,
that is great. Creatives tend to work very well and the best with other creatives. That's what I've found in, my lifetime of doing this, is that the creatives that come up with the best material are the ones that have at least filtered that through some other creative people somewhere in the process and gone, hey, can you give me your feedback on this? Hey, is this working? Hey, is there a different way I can do this? Like, writers have beta readers and editors for a reason, to come in and lend a fresh perspective. And I feel like Dave Filoni being the only credited writer the entire show, not apparently having really looked to have collaborated with a lot of other writers on this. On the one hand, it is very much his show and he's put out what he wanted to put out. And again, I think that's a good thing, but I do feel like some of these structural issues, some of it could have been fixed with Disney not being assholes about the 8-episode thing, but some of it could have also been fixed with some other people saying, hey, what if we restructured this slightly? Or is there a reason this character has to be here?
Right.
Like, can we do this? Can we do that? Can we kind of move things around a little bit? So I think that would be something that would benefit the show going forward, is if they had that. Because I think where these shows kind of lose the rails structurally, and this is particularly egregious in Mandalorian Season 3. Like, Mandalorian Season 3 is 100,000 times worse about its structure than Ahsoka is where there's so few writers on it. Like, who's actually focusing on making sure the show is tight, making sure the show is well paced and well structured.
Well, I want to ask you one final thing.
Yes.
What are your like predictions or hopes for season 2? What do you want to see in season 2?
Yeah, I'm glad we're ending on this because I feel like a lot of this recap episode and a lot of this looking back at has been so focused on the structural issues with the show.
Yeah.
I feel like we focused so heavily on the production and also just on like some of the particular things that with that structure that rubbed us the wrong way.
Sure.
So I do want to conclude on a positive note because again, I like this show.
Right.
I used to not like this show and now I've come around to liking it. But yes, let's end on something.
Yeah, some story things. Like, what are some story
end on
things?
some
Yeah.
positive speculation for the future because we are getting season 2, and I am very excited to see the story continue.
Sure.
We are definitely going to find out what Balin was looking for. I think we're going to see more friction in Thrawn's faction. I think we're going to see his friction with the Night Sisters of Dathomir, and now the fact that he's back in the known galaxy, he's going to have friction with the other Imperial warlords that have
the Shadow Council,
been hanging out. The Shadow Council,
Mm-hmm.
Palian, and all of that. I think we're going to see a lot more Thrawn. I think we're probably going to see a lot more Hera. I think in the next season.
Yeah, because is that it? Is that everything you got? Because I don't want to like jump on all your
Those
stuff.
are the major ones.
Okay.
Also, I do think we're going to find out what the fuck was up with Merrick the whole time.
Okay. So I think you're right with the Thrawn and Hera stuff. I think because what I genuinely think they're going to do is whatever they do next with Thrawn and Hera and stuff has to set up the movie. Like it's 100%
production timeline has to do that.
Has to, because you don't have a lot of time. Like there's not much left to do. Ahsoka season 2 will be essentially a prequel for the movie. It's going to set up everything it needs to set up for the movie to be like, here's the finale. Here's the home run of the whole entire Ahsoka bit. Like they're really going to set up like Thrawn and be like, this is what he needs to do. On the Ahsoka and Sabine side of it all, where they're kind of end up, I think that they're gonna, I really want to see them team up with Shin. I really want her to become essentially like the second Padawan, the third, like the trio to their lady bossness. I want to see Shin flip. I think that what I would want for her story is that she feels abandoned by Balin and he is here to serve the greater good of resetting the whatever he
and the
needs
Empire.
to do.
Don't forget the Empire left her hanging to dry.
Right. So she has no allegiance to Thrawn. She has no allegiance to the Morgan or the Night Sisters, any of that shit. And clearly Balin is like, well, this is my path. You have a different path kind of thing. And she didn't, quote unquote, take her place in the upcoming Empire or whatever. So I want to see her essentially join our group, our hero group. I want her and Ahsoka and Sabine to be like a trio, because that to me is like she's such a good like opposite of the three of them. Like she would be the nice balance to their group.
If you add Huyang into the mix, you've basically got a D&D party. I'm just saying, if you have Shin team up with them and then Huyang is also there, that is a pretty decent 4-person. Now it's not well balanced because you got 3 Jedi and Huyang is also here, but you can do it.
I mean, maybe it leaves room to create a new character or something. I mean, if you're stuck on the planet and it's Sabine, Shin, Balin, and Ahsoka and Huyang, I feel like maybe there's a new character we haven't met yet that's still there on the planet. Possibly some other evil person, more evil, maybe less evil. I don't know what they're looking for. So maybe this is this character or this thing that they're looking for might be another character. Or maybe it's Merrick.
I acknowledge verbally on the podcast that I am aware of the existence of Abeloth in Legends, but I will not be entertaining that further until season 2.
All right, there you go. There's your tease.
I will not be acknowledging this until I can be proven right that it's not Abeloth.
Well, and I think the difference, because I have no idea what that means, and that's fine. We don't need to talk about what that means yet, because
we really don't. Please keep going.
Because the whole thing is the Mortis gods, right? Like that's what we're kind of leaning towards here with season 2. I would love to see either live action Mortis gods, like have all those characters like be presented by an actor and then bring him into the show in some capacity, whether that's in a Force vision, whether that's they just literally meet them like they did on that episode of Clone Wars, or just something along those lines would be nice. You know, maybe the father, maybe the son, and maybe the mother. I don't know if that's a thing, but maybe that's the character we haven't met yet.
We are not gonna talk about Abeloth on this show until season 2. Listeners who are aware of what Bradley just said and doesn't realize he just said because he hasn't read Fate of the Jet. No. Stop it. Stop it. Stop it. Yes, you, who is about to tag me in something to ask about Abeloth. I will not be entertaining this discussion until we get more information on season 2. I am also in the middle of reading the Darth Bane books, which are all the fuckway on the other side of the chronology. I'm busy, leave me alone.
On the other side of that, non-Mortis related, I would also like them to bring in and recast Luke and have him be brought in, because I know that he is involved in Heir to the Empire in the original story in some capacity. So I would love for them to honestly, anybody who's relevant to that story, if they feel like going in a similar direction, like bring them in and recast them, because I would like to see that.
Please don't go in a similar direction. Please do something else, Dave. I remember those books. Please don't. There's parts of those that I think are neat. And then there's parts of them that I'm like, ooh, you didn't age well. You didn't. Maybe one day on a Legends episode we will talk about that trilogy, but I think it's more likely that we talk about the Glove of Darth Vader series.
Sure.
Which we definitely need to do at some point. We definitely need to do it. I'm just saying. No, I agree with all of that. Definitely Luke I think that the big three are probably going to show up in a recast form in the movie, in Heir to the Empire. So having one of them, maybe Luke or maybe even Leia, show up.
Yeah, I think someone from the original trio should show up if the story calls for it, right?
Yes,
I don't know what the story is, so I can't say. However, because Luke showed up in the Book of Boba Fett and he was in The Mandalorian or whatever, I just feel like that, let's keep the tradition. Why not?
Han. Bring in Han and his terrible beard.
Sure, Han and Chewie can show up. What's Alden doing?
I don't know.
Bring him back as young Han Solo and call it a day.
So Bradley, do you have any final thoughts on the Ahsoka show before we put this one fully to rest until the next season comes out?
No, I genuinely enjoyed it. I have the memory, I went to, my friend's house to watch it every single week. So I made it an event, right? Every time I watched it. So it was very special in that capacity. And I like turning a show like Star Wars into an event where I make it special, because otherwise then it's just two, sad nerds who watch it for a podcast. And I don't like that. So
I love that. That's where I live.
In seriousness, Ahsoka was great. I genuinely did like it. I thought that the show was great. I love Rosario Dawson. I think she's fantastic. I love casting for this show. It was so fucking good. Ezra was something I didn't know could be that good in live action. It was very one of those things where we didn't really know what to expect. And I thought, the Ezra casting was great. Hu Yang coming back, something again I didn't know we needed, and bringing him into the show, fantastic. And then Sabine was so fucking good too. Live action, they translate so well into live action. It's Bo-Katan all over again. The actors that they picked for casting for this show was so good that's really what put me over the edge for this show being good. And I enjoy it, and I can't wait for season 2.
Yeah, I mean, my final thought on the show was I'm glad we covered it, because I feel like I've come to appreciate it a lot more on the rewatch. I remain glad that it exists for all my issues with it. Structurally, for all my issues with the way it was set up, the issues with how it was produced by Lucasfilm and how it was released. I'm glad it exists. I'm glad it exists in the form that Dave wanted it to exist in. And I'm really excited to see where this story goes. I think they brought the characters on such a journey over the course of 8 episodes. I'm really excited to see how that journey continues, because the journey's not over yet. But I really ended up appreciating the details of this show a lot more on the watching it for the podcast. So I'm glad I did. This is one of the cases where I'm really glad we have this show, because it has made me reevaluate previous opinions of a piece of Star Wars media and have come out more favorably. So I think that's generally a positive thing. Okay, what are we doing next, Bradley?
Let's see. Next week which is weird to say because normally when we do these recasts, we don't normally jump right into something else. But we are going to next week continue our coverage of Visions season 1. As you know, we had to stop during the writer's strike and actor strike.
SAG-AFTRA strike specifically was why we had to stop.
Right. And we were trying to honor their rules, and so we decided to just stop covering it, and which is fine because season 1 we were doing this more as like a not a for fun thing, but just
we were filling time anyway.
Filling time,
until
right.
Ahsoka came out.
Exactly. And so we weren't super like hooked on it anyway. We were like, okay, it's not that big of a deal. We can wait a while. Now, did we know we were going to end up waiting almost like it feels like a year to do this? Probably
August,
not.
Let's see, July, August, September, October, November, December. It was almost 6 months before we returned to covering a TV show.
That's crazy, which has never happened in the history of this podcast.
I'm excited. A solid like 17-18% of the episodes are not TV.
Yeah.
We had to change our whole intro because of it.
So I'm excited for you all to hear the Twins episode that we already recorded and is in the can, that we recorded 6 months ago. Whether or not we say anything in there that is outdated, irrelevant, or
I'm checking.
unnecessary.
I'm checking this week.
Okay, he's going to check.
I will mention it at the beginning if I flag anything that I need to provide context on at the time.
And then I'm going to have to listen to it only for the sake of remembering how we structured doing the coverage, because we're going to have to watch The Village Bride next, and I feel like I don't remember how to do it.
It all leaked out of your brain.
I really did. It's been 6 months since we decided to change format again. So I'm going to go back, listen, and then reevaluate for the following episode, the following week after that. And we'll do that all up until we start doing Bad Batch coverage. So we're really just going to keep going on and on.
Forever and ever and ever. The tentative plan is, we're going to finish out Visions because we don't like leaving that unfinished. So next week will be the Twins episode, and then we will continue on to the end of season 1. We are not doing season 2 of Visions yet. Then we will do the Bad Batch, which at that point we will be recording our first episodes of the Bad Batch right before the finale of the whole show airs, so it's going to be a wild time. And then, if reports are to be believed, we will be jumping straight into the Acolyte after that.
Wild. Lucasfilm doesn't want us to have a break, but that's fine.
Look.
We can sleep when we're dead, right?
We suffer personally.
Sure.
The second most scheduling-wise out of any podcast that I'm familiar with. Do you want to know who suffers the worst?
I don't want to know.
Who has it worse than we do?
Who's worse?
First Steps, a Star Wars podcast, because Calvin not only has to juggle scheduling their show out, but he also has to make sure that Andy isn't spoiled.
Right, it has to be in timeline order.
So they have to structure everything to make sure that Andy can watch something as it's airing. It's crazy. I feel so bad for them. Go listen to First Steps, the Star Wars podcast. It is excellent.
Do you happen to know where they're at in the timeline?
They are, so they took a break to do High Republic Adventures. They just finished. They're about to jump back in the Rebels season. No, they're about to jump into Bad Batch season 3, because they were in Rebels season 1 when the strike started.
And then they have to go back.
They're going to go back. They're going to do Bad Batch. And then they're going to do, I think they're either going to do Acolyte or they're going to do, jump back into Rebels. I don't want to speak for them.
Right.
I
but
know
that's wild. I'm so glad we don't do things in timeline order, because that would be insane.
Yes, First Steps, a Star Wars podcast, and also Dark Side Divas, both shows that watch the Star Wars in chronological order.
You are all crazy.
You are all crazy.
Crazy.
Oh, boy. I understand why Steph and Chris have their policy of, we're not going to add a show to the chronology until it's done.
I feel them on that, yeah.
I get it. I understand it. Okay, pluggables. You can find a bunch of shows that Bradley has worked on in some producing capacity on Peacock and Bravo. We only do one at a time because there are so many of them. Right now we are plugging Married to Medicine Season 10 for now. I hope we switch soon because I'm sick of saying Married to Medicine season 10.
Oh, sorry. I just caught what you said. Sorry. For clarification, I work on the production side on these shows. I do not work on the producing side of these shows. Those are two totally different things, people. Trust me, I don't want to be on the producing side on reality shows.
I was trying to make you sound more important than you actually are.
Oh, no, I'm important. I'm just not trying to rub elbows with certain people on the show, and I don't want to associate in that way too much.
I swear one day we will do the stuff Charles and Bradley do outside of this podcast episode. And speaking of the things that Charles does outside of this episode, you can also find me on the Star Wars TTRPG podcast For Light and Dice with a bunch of other really cool content creators. And I have a series of thriller novels that's set in a gay adult film studio that's now available on Amazon Kindle called Beach House Studios. So that is all the pluggables that we do. All right, Bradley, you're ready to do something that isn't Ahsoka and episodes that are not 2 hours long?
Oh, it's going to be fantastic editing-wise. I'm looking forward.
All right, well, run the socials. Thank you for listening to this episode of Gold Squadron Gays. Did Charles fuck something up? Email us at goldsquadrongays@gmail.com to let us know. You can also find us on Twitter at @GoldSquadGays, and you can find us on TikTok and Instagram at @GoldSquadronGays. You can also find us on YouTube at our Gold Squadron Gays YouTube channel, where we post full episodes of this show. Finally, if you liked the show, don't forget to rate us and give us a review on your favorite podcast platform. That allows other people to find our show. As always, thank you for listening to Gold Squadron Gays, and we'll see you next week. I am a sad nerd. I own that. I'm also hot, so...
No comment there. People don't know what you look like for a reason. So
they especially don't know what you look like.
That's very true. That's why we're on radio. So
This face was made for radio.
Yes, we have beautiful radio faces.